Hey guys, my name is Trevor Sullivan and welcome back to my video channel. Thanks so much for joining me for another video on LXD. Before we jump into this topic though, I am an independent content creator, so please leave a like on this video, share a link with your friends, family, and professional contacts, and if you're interested, leave a comment below with any insights that you have on this topic, or let me know what other types of topics you want to see on this channel. So the topic that I wanted to talk about in this video is how to manage files on virtual machines that are running on a LXD server by using the LXC command line utility. Now, in an earlier video, I actually talked about how to set up LXD remote servers on the LXC command line interface. So we can, from our Windows system, actually remotely manage a LXD server as well as the virtual machines on top of it, and actually use this file management capability right here to copy files from our Windows system out to the virtual machines on that LXD server. We can also download files from the server to our client, and we can also edit files directly using a local text editor rather than having to get an interactive shell on the remote virtual machine where we can edit those files. So these are just kind of helper commands that make some common file management operations a little bit simpler on your virtual machines. Now, for starters, I've actually got a LXD server set up on bare metal right now, and I also have my LXC command line interface tool on my local Windows system connected to that remote bare metal LXD server. So if I do a LXC list command and just look at the names of the virtual machines that I currently have running here, you can see that I've got a handful running right here. And so what we want to do for starters is just create a new virtual machine to kind of play around with. So to do that, I'm just going to do an LXC launch command, specify that it's going to be a virtual machine, and then I'll use the standard Ubuntu 2304 Lunar Lobster image right here, and I'll just give it a name like U01. Now, once this virtual machine is up and running, if you watched my video that covers networking in LXD, you'll probably know that the default profile, unless otherwise customized, is actually going to connect the network interface of this virtual machine to what's known as a bridge network that is isolated just to the LXD server itself. So I can't directly access this virtual machine across the network because I haven't connected it using a bridge interface or using a Mac VLAN interface directly to my physical network. But I can still access the virtual machine by proxying my connections through the LXD server with these LXC file commands. So let's see what capabilities we have right here. So we can delete files on the remote virtual machine, again, without having direct access to it, without having SSH access directly to the VM. We can also interactively edit files on the file system of the virtual machine. There's also this mount option here, which actually allows you to create kind of a permanent connection to the file system of the remote virtual machine. And you can pull or download files and upload or push files to that virtual machine. So for starters, let's take a file on the local file system of our Windows dev system here and copy it up to the virtual machine, again, without having direct network access to that VM. So I'm just going to go into my downloads folder here on my other screen here, and I'm going to do an LXC file push command right here, and we're going to push a file from our local file system up into the virtual machine. So to do that, we'll just do an LXC file push, then we'll specify the source file that we want to reference right here, and then we need to specify the instance or virtual machine name // and then the path on that virtual machine where we want to copy the file into. So what we'll do is just find a file. So we'll say LXC file push. We'll specify our local file here. So I'm actually going to cd into my home downloads directory here for starters. And then I'll copy this file here called penguin svg, and we'll copy that up to U01, that's our instance or virtual machine name, and then I'll go under the /home/Ubuntu directory, that's the home folder of the user that gets created by default on that system. And so that should just copy that SVG file right up to that system. And as you can see, we're getting this error here saying that that's a directory. And so we'll just add on a / to the end there to indicate that it's a directory that we want to copy to, and that works just fine. So now, how do we actually list the files on that remote system? If we just run LXC file right here, you're not going to see any kind of list command. So in this case, what we actually want to do to list the files, to actually verify that the file is there, is to use the exec command, and then it will just specify our VM name, do a -- and then just say ls-lga/home/Ubuntu, and that'll just list the files in the home directory of that Ubuntu user on that virtual machine, again, without having direct access to it across the network. And as you can see, that SVG file is right there. So now let's say that we wanted to download that file from the virtual machine back onto our local file system. Let's say maybe I deleted the local copy of that file, and so I need to go ahead and download it once again. So this is really easy to do. We'll just do an LXC file, and then this time we're going to use the pull command to download the file from the virtual machine. So if we look at that, we just specify the VM/path that we want to download, and then we can specify the target path on our local file system that we want to download that file to. So what I'm going to do is just copy the path right here so that I can save that. And I'm also going to copy this file name here so I don't have to retype that out. And then we'll specify the path right here prefixed with the virtual machine name. Let me just do a Windows V and paste in the path there. And then we'll specify a local file name like file01.svg. And that should download it from the remote system to our local system. And then in PowerShell, I'll just do get item-path file01.svg. And there you go, we've downloaded that file. So now that I've downloaded that file and we have a local copy of it, I'll go ahead and just delete it from the remote system. So if we do an LXC file command, we can specify the delete subcommand right here to remove that file from the remote instance. And this time, all we have to do is specify the instance and the path because we're not going to be downloading it to our local file system. So we'll go ahead and just specify the u01/home/ubuntu/penguin23159.svg, and that should delete it from the remote file system. And then we'll just rerun our ls command right here. So if you just do a Control-R and search for the ls command in your shell, that should find it for you. And as you can see, that file has disappeared from the /home/Ubuntu directory. And again, we haven't SSH'd into this virtual machine. The VM isn't even attached to our network. We're just proxying all these commands through the LXD daemon. All right, so let's take a look at the LXC file command once more here, and you're actually going to see that we have this mount command right here. And so this actually allows us to mount a remote directory on the virtual machine's file system to our local system. And this actually uses SSHFS, which allows you to create an SSH connection to a virtual machine and then basically mount it as a local file system. Unfortunately, SSHFS for Windows is pretty out of date and it has a lot of bugs in it. But there's actually an alternative mode for this mount command that creates a network listener that allows us to proxy our connections through an SFTP connection. So let's take a look at how this works. If we do LXC file mount, we can specify a listener port. So if we do --listen, we can specify an IP address and a port that we want to listen on instead of doing the direct mount with SSHFS if that's not an option for you. So what we're going to do is say LXC file mount, and then we'll say listen. And I could either specify a local interface like 127.0.0.1, or I could do something like 0.0.0.0 to specify all IP addresses or all network interfaces that are configured on my local system here. So I'll go ahead and just do that for now. And then I'll specify a random port number like 46,718. And when I run this command, it'll spit back a username and password that I can specify and connect to locally so that we can connect to this listener. Now, it looks like I have an issue here. Of course, I totally forgot to specify the instance that I want to mount to. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll do U01 and then specify the home Ubuntu subdirectory just so that we'll mount directly to that path. And so let me see what's going on right here. I guess I need to just specify the instance name. I guess it's not going to let me specify a path since we're doing it in listener mode here. So now you can see I've got this username and password being printed out right here. And so what we're going to do is connect to localhost right here on port 46718. And we can do that with a utility like WinSCP. I think FileZilla might also support SFTP as well. But what we're going to do is fire up WinSCP right here. We're going to go ahead and specify our host name, which is localhost. We'll specify the port number 46718, and then we'll just copy the auto-generated username and password, and this will proxy our SFTP connection through the LXD daemon to that virtual machine that is running on that host. We'll go ahead and accept the host key right here, and now you can see that I'm on /run/LXD agent on that remote VM. So if I just specify that I want to go back to root by clicking on it there, I can go down to, let's say, /home/Ubuntu, and there's nothing in there. So we could go ahead and just drag and drop a file from my system over to the virtual machine and upload it into that environment. And I could also take that file and drag it back over to my local system to download that file back to my system. So this gives us a little bit more of an interactive approach to managing the remote file system of this virtual machine that's running on my LXD server. All right, so the last subcommand that we have here, let me just close this really quick, is let's do a Control-C to close that. We'll do LXC file, and then we can interactively edit files on the remote system by using this edit command. So let's say that I needed to set up a static host mapping for an IP address to host name mapping on the remote virtual machine for some reason. So if I do a LXC, let's do an exec on U01, and let's say that I try to ping an endpoint like my server 01. So that's not going to resolve because we don't actually have a system on my network called my server 01. So if we wanted to override that and specify a static IP address to hostname mapping in the remote hosts file, I don't actually have to SSH into this VM in order to modify the host's file. Instead, all I can do is say LXC file edit, and then specify the instance that I want to modify and the path to the file that I want to edit. So in this case, I'll say I want to edit U01/etc/hosts, and now I can use Vim on my local Windows system here in order to add a new entry. We'll just say 127.0.0.1 and do a tab and then specify my server 01. So we'll hit escape and do :WQ to save and close that. And now if we rerun this exec command to run ping on that remote virtual machine, we should now be able to resolve that host name, my server 01, to some IP address. So again, we don't have to have direct SSH access to that VM. We can still do interactive file editing of configuration files on our LXD virtual machines without having direct network access to our VM infrastructure. So those are just some useful helper commands. Of course, always make sure that you clean up your environment when you're done playing with it. So I'm just going to delete and force delete that virtual machine that we created. I hope you guys enjoyed this video on LXD once again. Please leave a like, please subscribe to the channel, leave a comment below, and share a link with your friends, family, and professional contacts. Thank you for supporting my channel. Take care.